friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here for another video. This is the second one in the new series I've started on my essentials list. I'll link to the full playlist down below so you can see the previous one, and make sure you keep watching because there'll be more of these coming out. I actually already forgot what my last one was. Oh, baking essentials. So today it's about food preservation essentials. So most of this is what's going to be essential to me. This is going to be very different for each person, and you should never feel that just because I'm reading off this list that it means this is what you should do and not what you should have. It's all going to be tailored to the person and their individual needs, their pocketbook, their space, and so much more. So starting off with having a canner. So when I first started canning, I was just doing water bath canning. So I had a simple water bath canner, and I was doing jams and peaches and other kinds of fruits and apple butters, applesauce, all the things, and salsa. I almost always forget to say salsa because that's an important thing to us. Homemade, of course. So having at least a water bath canner, that would be, as far as canning goes, you got to at least have that. Because you can and this will make some people angry, but you literally can anything in the water bath method. The difference is when you're talking low acid foods, you have to boil it, a rolling boil, for a minimum of 3 hours. There might be a few things you can go a little bit less than that. I do know, and I'll put a link to this down below, Ball and some other places, it was common that they had charts for water bath canning, things like meats and vegetables and more. And it was almost always 3 hours all the way across the board, no matter what size jar you were using, no matter what it was you were canning. And people still all over the world that are canning at all use this method. But I will admit, I still love having a pressure canner, and I will still use it for any low acid foods because it's much faster. It cuts the time at least in half when it comes to pressure canning your vegetables and your meats. Meats in a quart jar are going to typically take 90 minutes. In a pint jar are going to take 75 minutes. But when you're talking something like carrots, I learned that it only takes 25 minutes to pressure can carrots that are in a pint jar. I can't remember. I only can them in pint jars, so I don't know what a quart would be or if it's the same. So you're reducing the time by a great amount. So really, when you have a pressure canner, you can save on electricity as well as time. So I use, for all my canning, I do not can inside the house. I do not use my glass top stove, even though I know people who have done it, even with a big canner like mine. I prefer to just do it outside anyway, so I do most of my canning during the driest part of our very wet and rainy climate using just a propane burner. And it's actually one that we bought many years ago that came with our turkey fryer that we only use it as a turkey fryer maybe once or twice, but that propane stove I've been using it ever since for canning, and I love doing it that way. I can just do it outside, keeping the heat out there, especially in the hottest time of the year, and it's nice. So that to me is an essential, and that's how I do all of my canning. So the next on my list would be my dehydrator. So I have two different types. I have my electric dehydrators that you'll see right behind me here. These are both the Cosori. The reason the bottom one looks different is I have my linen covers on the racks here. This one has the silicone covers for doing wet things, and I can, switch them up. I've got enough of the linen and enough of the silicone to fill up two dehydrators. So if I'm doing all wet things, like let's say I'm dehydrating some eggs from my chickens, raw eggs, dehydrating some pureed tomatoes for making sauces and more, anything like that, bone broth, I can fill up both dehydrators. And so the silicone and the linen covers are also essentials to me. And the same thing the other way around. I have enough covers to fill up both if I'm doing a lot of herbs. I like using these for whenever I'm cutting, drying things, especially things that tend to be, once they're dry, especially, they end up being really small and they can fall through the rack. This just keeps everything contained, helps things to dehydrate faster. And it can also be very beneficial if you have plastic trays rather than stainless steel like I have. And that will at least help prevent as much plastic exposure to your food. You just want to make sure that whatever fabric you're using is 100% natural and undyed. So I have undyed 100% linen fabric right here. But I also can use these same things, the covers, on my wood stove dehydrating rack, which I use that during the winter, obviously, when I have fires going. And that Patrick built for me quite a number of years ago. I use it for some things like meats, like especially making jerky. I will use it on top of the wood stove where it's going to get a lot hotter, and it basically cooks and dries the meat at the same time. But I do rotate it. That gets used if I'm dehydrating herbs or other delicate things or things that can dry quite quickly and I don't want them cooked. Then I use those same racks. He actually made two, so one is stacked on top of the other, much like this. And I will dry next to the wood stove. And sometimes it can be dry at the end of the day. Sometimes it can take a couple of days, as long as it's dry enough that it doesn't mold by the time it's done. I'll do that with like red onion skins. I'll just, when I'm going through my onions or any onion skin, just throw them on there, dehydrate them, and then powder them, and then add them to my granulated onion blend so that then I can use it in whatever, and I'm making the most of the skins that way. Not that you can't use the skins for making a vegetable broth or even a bone broth and throw them in there for added flavor if you're going to strain them out. But powdered up, they're just fine. They work great. And by the way, I'll link to the silicone, I'll link to my Kasori. They have a bigger size than this now. I love these, but I like the smaller size, and just getting a second one and stacking it means I'm not taking up any more room on my counter here, and I can just stack them. And it works really great for me this way. And if I'm using this during the summertime, we have plenty of solar, I can just throw an extension cord and plug it into my solar outlet out here in the foyer. In the summertime, we got lots of solar power that we can collect. We don't get a lot during the winter time. So yeah, if we got fires going, I'm going to use the fires. It's going to, even if we had plenty of solar power, if I've got fires going, it's still going to put less wear and tear on my electric gear. Then it's having ways to vacuum seal. Now I have my preferred ways. I have the Food Saver tops, and this is vacuum sealing in jars. I gave up on the Food Saver bags years ago. In fact, I gave up on the Food Saver 2 years ago. So I don't use either. I prefer to use jars for many things, not everything, but as many things as I'm able, whether it be my herbs, my dehydrated apples, dehydrated black olives, bone broth, whatever. And then I simply vacuum seal into my jar. So I got to have a way to vacuum seal. So I use the Food Saver tops, and then the brake bleeder pump. If I can link to the exact one that I have and use, I actually have a couple of them, I will do that down below. If it's showing unavailable yet again because it keeps selling out, you can find one very similar, or you can even go to Harbor Freight and find one. But if it comes to jars like recycled green olive jars that they're not the right size to work with either the wide or regular mouth Food Saver top, then in that case, I use the chamber that Patrick built for me, and he is currently still making them and selling them. So he makes quart size, he makes a half-gallon size. I don't use a half-gallon size because anything I'm going to vacuum seal in a half-gallon jar, I'm going to use the Food Saver top with a brake bleeder. But I have the separate brake bleeder that I use specifically for my vacuum chamber. And it just hooks up right to the vacuum chamber. But anyway, if you're interested in purchasing the chamber, just email me, raincountryhomestead@gmail.com. I'll send you the whole product list, because it's going to explain price and all that kind of stuff, but also how to order. And it also includes a link to the video on how to use the vacuum chamber. But there's many other ways to vacuum seal. And I did a video, it might be as much as 3 years ago now. And even since then, they've come out with more different ways you can vacuum seal. There's so many different ways out there. But I'll at least link to that video where I talk about the options for vacuum sealing. And that was what was available at the time. But like I said, there's even more. You can just do some searching. And so many different companies have jumped on board with this and are creating their own ways to vacuum seal jars. Now, then another thing would be if I'm talking about freezing meat. So we got wild meats, be it fish, be it elk, be it venison, that we are having to process and wrap ourselves, then I need to have freezer paper on hand. Now, the difference between butcher paper and freezer paper is butcher paper is just that, it's just the paper. But freezer paper has a lining in it, a coating of some kind. While there is question on how safe that is, you really need something that's going to seal the air out. So you either have to wrap it in plastic cling wrap and then use butcher paper, or you can use just freezer paper, which is what I use. And as long as you wrap it correctly, it's going to keep that meat from getting freezer burnt for years in your freezer. You just got to wrap it right and make sure there's no air exposure. That's why you have to use some kind of plastic or the coated freezer paper. Oh, and then I put this one towards the bottom, even that goes back to canning. There's a couple of things that you could do without. They're not absolutely essential, but I sure like having them, and that is the jar lifter. So lifting your jars out. I mean, I've taken jars out of a canner before without having the lifter, but I would say that is pretty necessary if you don't want to burn your hands. Otherwise, you got to find a way, you know, especially if you're water bath canning, because you actually would have to stick your hands down to the water. If it's pressure canning, you can usually get away with wearing an UV glove or taking some kind of hot pad or something and just lifting them out. So not absolutely necessary, but definitely nice to have a jar lifter and the lid lifter. So when you're heating your lids before you're canning, you can get a little magnetic lid lifter. I didn't have one for years. And then once I got one, they're not very expensive. I'm like, I love having this thing because you can just you just stick it down in there, you lift the lid, you set it on top of your jar. You don't have to touch the hot water at all. And then, of course, you're going to have your jars and your lids. I personally have not tried the Azure Standard jars. I really wanted to because they're really nice looking jars. But I have tons and tons of jars that, though I've bought many from our local store, we have, for over a period of several years, kept ending up with other people's recycled jars because they were done canning. Lady down the street some years ago, she decided she didn't want to can anymore. She had 2 boxes of jars just set out on the street corner and said free. So we grabbed them. And at garage sales, you can find jars quite often at garage sales. But one garage sale, or Patrick was out of town. He drove there because it was, you know, they were advertising some bigger items, like some tanks he wanted to get. While I was there, they're like, hey, do you guys need jars? They gave him boxes and boxes and boxes of jars for free. Half-gallon pints and quarts. Cur and ball, all of them. So I have more than I could ever use. So I can't share my experience on any Azure Standard jars as much as I'd like to try some because they just look nice. However, I can share with you my experience with lids. Now, I still have a lot of ball and cur lids that we stocked up years ago when they were on sale. However, I have also a lot of Tatler lids. I have a video on how to use them. They're the kind that are made to be reused over and over again. Though, yes, you can reuse those metal lids as long as they still have a good seal around them, the little gummy part, as long as they're not bent on the rim. You can reuse them. I've reused lids like that a couple times. Typically what I do is I use those for the ones I've already canned in, be it water bath or pressure canned. I'll use those for vacuum sealing because you can use them over and over and over and over again for vacuum sealing before they just get too wore out, and then you just toss them. And by the way, I don't recommend using the Tatler lids for vacuum sealing because they're not made the same way. They're not going to have the hold by a simple vacuum sealing. You have to, they should only be used for water bath or pressure canning. But they do require a little extra step when you go to use them. But it's simple. Once you know how to do it, it's simple. So I have a video showing how to use it and how simple it is to figure out just how tight to get them on there before they go in the canner, and then tightening them down once they come out of the canner. Now, a lot of people's concern with lids is that, you know, like with the Tatler lids, well, they're plastic and I don't want to use plastic in my food. I get that. However, pretty much unless you're switching to all glass, every canning lid, even the metal lids of any kind, have some kind of plastic coating on the inside. So it doesn't matter if you're doing the Tatler lids or the Ball or the Cur or the Supreme or the 4 Jars lids, you're still going to have that. That's just the way it is, unfortunately. But at least they're BPA free. Now that I've gone through my list of essentials, I want to list a few things that me personally, so don't get angry if you have any of this stuff, I personally do not find essential. And that is, well, for one, a food saver and the food saver bags. I did it first years ago, but found better ways that I prefer, and also got frustrated with bags getting more expensive and not working as well. Same thing with the food savers itself, as many times as I had to replace mine. And then the other thing is, again, these are things I've used or have tried to use in the past and find that virtually they're unnecessary. That is Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers. Oxygen and desiccants. I find oxygen absorbers especially completely useless. And especially if you're vacuum sealing stuff anyway, it's unnecessary. If you're storing grains and such, this is the one time I might use a Mylar bag, depending on if it's going into my long-term storage or not. And then I may transfer my grains into a large Mylar bag. Then I still don't use oxygen absorbers. I push out as much of the air as I can, and then I seal that bag up, and then I put the lid on. And haven't had any problems so far doing it that way. That's going to be a matter of choice for you. I just find oxygen absorbers to be a complete waste of money, because half the time, if not all the time, they don't work as they're intended, at least not anymore, or at least the ones I've had. And then when you're vacuum sealing things in jars, they're just, a lot of people like that little added thing in there, but it's unnecessary. You don't need desiccants, you don't need oxygen absorbers when you're vacuum sealing into jars. As long as your seal holds, it's going to be fine. Some people will throw the oxygen absorber in there just in case the seal comes undone. The problem with that is though, that if there was something wrong with the lid to begin with, it may reseal it, but then it's still going to come unsealed again over time. So it's not a guarantee that it's going to hold. You're better off leaving your vacuum sealed jars out for at least a day or two to make sure they're going to stay sealed. Because if there was any initial problem with the lid or anything else, or even the jar might have a little crack or chip, it's going to come unsealed within that time, and then you'll know, and then you get a new lid, new jar, whatever, and then vacuum seal, then leave it out another 24 hours. Then this one I've mentioned several times, and again, this is the one that offends people the most, but I'm just going to say it because for me, a freeze dryer is absolutely not essential. Not when dehydrating can be done in either much cheaper electric dehydrators, or even using the more old-fashioned methods that have been used for centuries and millennia, and that's, drying meats, smoking meats, drying meats over a fire or near a fire, doing the leather breeches with the green beans where you hang them crisscross, and dry them that way. Yes, you're going to get different results with dehydrating than freeze drying. Some are better, some are not as good as freeze drying. A lot of it's going to depend on how much you even like freeze dried food, which for me, there's only a few things I really like. Freeze dried, most stuff I don't like freeze dried. If I'm going to use it in soups, which is typically how I use freeze dried vegetables and whatnot, I find in most cases I prefer the dehydrated, dehydrated green beans, dehydrated potatoes, dehydrated carrots, dehydrated mushrooms over the freeze dried anyway, when it comes to that. So that's all going to be a matter of choice. So nobody should ever take my opinion on this personally. However, if you are on the fence about freeze dryers, I do recommend you check out the two videos I did, one year, one the very next year, when I found even more reasons why I didn't want a freeze dryer and why I even turned down getting a free one. And I recommend you check them both out, and also read some of the comments down below. So anyway, any thoughts, ideas you'd like to share? What are your favorite food preparedness essentials? I'm sure I left something off of my list, by the way. I'm sure I did. And someone's going to say something, I'm going to go, oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. But yeah, please put those in comments down below so we can get some ideas and learn a bit from you as well. And thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.